Hey everybody, today I'm going to be covering how we make a Dia de los Muertos altar in miniature for your throws or for other projects you might be working on. And I'm going to cover the contents and how-to for the NOLA Craft Culture Dia de los Muertos kit. There's a ton of stuff in here, but I'm going to go through all of it. The first step to making an altar or any kind of table, if you're doing the carnival table or you're doing any kind of little tablescape, like you're doing a tea party or you're doing a St. Joseph's altar or a Dia de los Muertos ofrenda, the first step is kind of getting your throw base prepped. If you're doing a shoe, I like to pick out a shoe that has a pretty silhouette, but like a bunch of straps, because that way I'm not wasting a pretty silhouette, but I also don't have to deal with juggling these aggravating straps. You can take scissors and just cut these straps short. If you're more comfortable with that, that's totally fine. And then you can cover up the spots where the straps are kind of a little bumpy. Or what I like to do is take a straight razor, but do this very carefully because these are extremely sharp, so don't cut yourself. I like to take a razor and just make a little slice right where the straps touch the shoe. If you have a shoe that's a little bit older or it's been sitting in your attic for a couple of summers, the straps might be loose enough to just pull out. Ooh, that one's almost loose enough to just pull out. So give that a try first before you whip out anything sharp. You might be able to just yank those out if they're a little loose, but if it's a new shoe, you're probably gonna end up cutting. So that strap, that saves me a little bit of cutting. So that mostly comes out, I'll snip the rest. So I made a slice with my razor, and if it doesn't go deep enough, you can always come back and get it all the way there. So shoes are pretty tough. They're put together to hold up to a lot of boogieing and partying and walking and such. So it may take a little bit of patience and a little bit of determination to get them prepped for you. So that's a nice clean break. And then over here, I'm gonna get the rest of it. And the nice thing about a Muse's shoe is that as long as the silhouette is shoe-like, it doesn't need to be functional. It's a little statue, it's a little work of art. So if the straps are aggravating from a design perspective, you can just take them off, and that's not going to bother anyone. I do want to mention that on my Dia de los Muertos ofrenda and on my St. Joseph's altar, I do put a little mini tablecloth on the top. So if you have a shoe that's a little bit beat up on the top, also a great use for that. But basically, I would just keep an eye out at the thrift stores and in your stash for shoes that are really nice and pretty, a really cool silhouette, I like to have a little platform on the Dia de los Muertos one because I think it looks a little bit more ornate. But you can use any kind of shoe. You could cut a wedge down, you could cut anything you wanted. I think the strappy ones are better because you can't really do a regular shoe with the straps on it. And if it's thin straps, it's easier to cut it down. It's kind of hard to cut the whole top off of a pump. So that's ready to go. Before I move on to my base glittering, I do want to mention a couple of other throws. Personally, if I were doing this design in a Clio cup, I would use a margarita glass, a nice big one. And my reason for that is both that a margarita glass is kind of thematically appropriate and we love tying all the little pieces together. The other thing is that if you put a piece of foam or cardboard and make this your table for you to put all your cute little miniatures in, that just gives you a much bigger space to work with. But you can also certainly do the same thing with any other shaped glass, a hurricane glass, a wine glass, put something on top and then use that as your table. Or you can put it up, whatever you want to do. So I would use a margarita glass and I would cut a piece of cardboard or craft foam, hot glue it in there, and then that would be my table. If you are doing a King Arthur Grail, I want to mention that in the shop, we have these lovely little wooden discs for anything where you're making a table or anything where you just want to kind of cap the top of this. So if you're making a table on top of your King Arthur Grail, you've got this space down here, and this is true of a Clio. You can use this space down here, but you can also use the top. We've got these little wooden discs. They come in different thicknesses. The thicker they are, the more they cost, but it sort of depends on what you're envisioning. So I would take a King Arthur Grail, I would hot glue that on top, and then I would lay my tablecloth and probably some fringe because I think that's cute, but it depends on your design. So just something to be aware of when you're making tables. We've got these little wooden discs that are very handy. You can also just use cardboard or craft foam. It's entirely up to you. The little wooden disc is just nice and strong and ready to roll like that. You don't have to do any cutting. You can just hot glue it and go. I would put it together and then glitter it rather than glittering all the pieces and then gluing them together. That's going to be more time efficient because you aren't putting glitter on spots that you're not going to see. And in general, if I'm assembling, it's better to assemble and then glitter than to glitter then assemble for structural reasons. Sometimes you have a bunch of little pieces and it's not feasible to assemble them and glitter them individually. Like if you were doing a cocktail skewer that had like a cherry and an orange and a lemon and a garnish on it, and you had like 4 little things, don't glue that together and then glitter each of them with a tiny paintbrush. That's going to make you crazy. But if you're putting something structural together, you're going to have an easier time if you put it together and let the glue go right onto naked plastic or naked leather shoe. You're going to have a better time with that than if you glitter all the pieces and then glue. The reason for that is if you're putting hot glue onto a glitter surface, if there's any loose glitter, that's just going to compromise the integrity of the glue. So if you are glittering and then assembling, make sure you get all the loose glitter off, a good brushing or whatever your preferred method is. If you're going to seal before assembling, anything to reduce the loose glitter that might interfere with the hold of your hot glue. All right, so those are my tables. For a shoe, I cut the straps off of a strappy, nice platform heel. For a grail, I would put a nice little wooden disc of whatever thickness was appropriate for the design. I would put that there. And then for a Clio cup, I would, if it's a wine goblet, you can use one of the discs and just put that on top. If it's a nice big round bowl, like a margarita glass is, or like a martini glass is, I would go ahead and cut a piece of cardboard or a piece of foam. Cardboard's a little bit stronger, but it might dent. Foam won't dent, but it is a little bit thinner. So it's entirely up to you and up to what you are envisioning. Okie doke. So when we are ready to glitter, you are probably already familiar with glitter. And if not, there's a full Glitter 101 video on our YouTube. Take a peek at that if you are brand new to glitter. No shame in being new. We all started somewhere, but maybe take a look over there. I have got a mix of Mod Podge and Aleene's, and I have personally got Purple Prince because I think that's super pretty. You could use, I would pick one of the colors that's already in the color palette so it's harmonious, but you know, you're the artist, you can do whatever you like. So I picked out the purple that's already kind of in the kit. It's kind of like a little accent color. So I like Purple Prince for this. You could do a red, you could do a nice lime green, you could do teal, whatever strikes your fancy. You go ahead and do that. So to begin, I'm going to take one of my little blue-handled brushes. These are my basic glittering brushes. We carry these at Craft Culture, but whatever brush you like to use. I've got a folder set up here. Hopefully y'all can see. Got a little manila folder there. I've got my shoe ready to go. I've got my glue, and I've got my Purple Prince. I'm going to go ahead and just give this a coat, spreading the glue everywhere. I'm going to make this whole table purple. If you want to do multiple colors, you certainly may, but remember that you need to let colors completely dry before you switch to other colors. So if you wanted the table to be purple and the platform to be red and the heel to be green, that's amazing, but you do have to let them dry and brush them in between colors. I personally always do 2 coats. On the semi-shears, I sometimes will do 3. So if I'm doing a white or a yellow shoe, I will occasionally do a 3rd coat if I feel like it could use it, but I never do less than 2. That's another one though where your mileage may vary depending on what throw you're using and what adhesive you're doing and kind of your overall style. You may be happy with 1 coat. I've got my glue all over. I've left the heel because I'm going to come back and do the heel later because I need a handle. I'm going to pour my Purple Prince all over my wet glue. And if you are already familiar with this, you can certainly skip ahead to just the pieces that pertain to the Dia de los Muertos kit. I just like to put it all in one spot in case someone has picked up the kit and is wanting the whole thing start to finish. And I missed a spot. All right. So I'm going to put that in front of a fan to dry. And when it's dry, I'm going to do the heel. and the bottom, and then I'm going to do a second coat. So we'll be back for that. Oh, if you are new to this, my folder catches all my glitter. I take my jar. Let me line this up. I'm going to do it backwards. And then I pour it into the jar. I would not do this in this direction, so it looks a little awkward, but I'm showing y'all how nicely this works. And that just keeps it tidy, so we don't get a bunch of glitter on our hands. We're still going to get glitter on our hands, but we don't get a bunch of glitter on our hands. And it keeps it tidy, and that way we don't waste. So every time you use a folder, I would pour it back into the jar along the seam of the folder. So when we are ready to do our second coat, and I'm just going to show y'all a piece of this. When we are ready to do our second coat, it's nice to incorporate a little confetti. I personally like the stained glass dots for this because I think it's a similar color palette and very festive. Not a ton of the shoe is going to show, so I would not bother putting a second coat on the top here. I would only worry about the platform and the heel because that's all that's really going to show. Same thing with your goblet or your grail or whatever you're working with. The stuff that's going to be covered, you can do that super detailed, or you can just roll with it. So on my second coat, this has already gotten its first coat of purple prints. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this glue on top of my first coat. And I have brushed off a little bit of the loose glitter to kind of get it ready. Oh, missed a spot. And the nice thing about a table is I can let it sit upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and hold it. And you can take as many steps as you want to take. I'm pretty comfortable holding it just by this thin lip. If your hands don't really enjoy the sensation of that, do it in phases. It is possible to go too fast, but it's pretty hard to go too slow. All right. So I'm getting purple. As I said, I'm doing this whole shoe purple. You can put as many colors on there as you want. Just make sure you let them dry in between colors. And again, if this is all old hat for you, feel free to skip ahead to the pieces that are actually Dia de los Muertos relevant. But I wanted someone to be able to sit down and watch the whole thing, start to finish, soup to nuts, if that was where they were at. So I've got a coat of glue. I'm going to take my dots. I'm going to take some stained glass dots and just sprinkle them. Just a little sprinkle of confetti, just to add a little visual punch. I'm not going to bother putting it on the bottom, but you can't really go too hard. So if you feel like you want to put that confetti absolutely everywhere, put it anywhere you like. So I did a pretty light pinch. There's some spots I'm going to fill in a little bit more. When you're adding confetti, remember to go light because you can always add more and you can't take it away. All right. So my confetti's good. Just going to shake that off. All right. Once you've got your confetti on there, and this is a second coat thing, I would not put confetti in my first coat because you're going to cover it up and it'll be a waste of confetti, and also the coat won't be as consistent because it'll have that confetti in there sort of interfering with the hold. I've got my confetti dots in there. I've got my purple prints. While the glue is still wet, I'm going to shake it onto the wet glue. Everywhere that I have put the confetti is going to stick to the glue, so the ultrafine can only fill in the space in between the confetti. And that's how we do the confetti technique. That's how we get that extra dimension, that extra little pop, without gluing a million little pieces of confetti individually. All right. So it's hard to see because the glitter is kind of sitting on top of the confetti, but once it's dry and I brush it off, the confetti will pop back out. So I'm going to set this. Let me get my glitter back in. I'm going to set my shoe like that so that all the wet surfaces are upright and nothing's touching the table. The only thing touching the table is already dry. And then I am going to, while this is drying, make all my little miniatures for my Dia de los Muertos altar. So I'm gonna set this aside, tidy up, and then we'll come back for the pieces of the Dia de los Muertos altar. Okie doke, so I am gonna go through absolutely everything in your kit, and you get a ton of stuff in this kit, so do not feel overwhelmed. We're gonna go through absolutely everything. There is a ton in this kit. You can make multiple throws. You can make multiple craft projects, but we have absolutely everything in here for you to make a masterpiece, but also do not feel like you need to use everything that's in here. So you get an instruction sheet that lists the kit contents if you want to check it. You've got a couple of warnings to be aware of. We'll go through those, and then you've got step-by-step written instructions for making the various pieces of your altar, but you can also watch this video. So the first thing that's in your kit is you have this piece of broad ribbon to make your tablecloth. The tablecloth mostly gets covered up by all the magnificent little miniatures that you make, but it is there, and every little detail counts, so it can help to have that tablecloth. So this is your tablecloth. You get some metallic green tubing and some cotton coated wires, and this is to make the arch that goes on your altar. I like to put mine in the back, but you can put it wherever you want to put your arch on your altar. So the mesh tubing and the wire is to make the arch. I'll show you all how we do that. You get these packets of paper flowers to decorate your arch and to decorate the altar wherever you want there to be some flowers filled in. We do also sell these a la carte, so you can buy a bag of just the flowers. If you're envisioning making multiples of these, that'll stretch out your kit and you can really go nuts. If you're putting a ton of flowers, but this is plenty of flowers to make this and have lots left over. So you've got your paper flowers. You've also got some oven baked clay. You've got a little 3-pack with 3 colors in there. You've got the granite special effect clay to make your molcajete. Let me get my this is the tray that I like to bake my oven baked clay on. We normally sell these at Craft Culture. I think we're out at the moment, but we'll restock. So you've got your granite to make your molcajete. You've got some pink to make the conchas. And then you've got some gold to make some cute little breads and stuff. You also get a mini jar of a little Pepto in My Step, which is kind of a pink pastel glitter. And that is how you add that kind of sugary texture onto your conchas. I'll show you how we do that. So I'm going to set my clay and my glitter aside for now. You get a little squeezy bottle of dimensional paint, and that's what you use to put the guacamole. And so that is sealed. That's in a tube that has a cap, but it's also sealed in a bag so that it absolutely doesn't dry out. I'll show you all that. You get a little 6-pack of some mini avocados. I like to put those near the guacamole, but also, elsewhere on that's just a cute little embellishment, our little avocados. You get various stone skulls. You get them in different sizes, so it really creates some visually interesting texture all over your altar. So you get some little guys, some medium guys, and some bigger guys. So there's our littles, there's our mediums, and there's our bigger ones. And by big, I still mean pretty tiny because it's, miniatures. The big ones we're going to embellish to make our little sugar skulls. I'll show y'all how. So to do the little sugar skulls, you've got toothpicks and E6000. You've got some tiny little rhinestones to do their eyes. And then the last thing is you get these little metal roses to kind of make the little garland that goes on top of the skull's head. So you get these little metal roses, you get some additional paper mulberry silk roses, and you get some little cabochon to kind of, just to fill it in. It looks more visually interesting if you have a bunch of different types of things on your altar. So we've given you a bunch of different types of things to work with. Part of the kit is that we've done the work of getting an absolute just visual splendor of so many different things so that the finished effect is just so magnificently busy, but in a nice way. So I'm going to set our skulls aside. I'm going to set our E6000 and our toothpick aside. A little foam does not come in the kit, but just save a little bit of packing foam from the next package you get, and I'll show y'all how we use this to do the skulls. All right. So you also get so part of the altar is putting out little offerings to bring back our loved ones to visit us, to bring their spirits back. So for a lot of us, our loved ones are fur babies. So we've got a little puppy dog with some bones to offer to our puppy dog, and a little kitty cat and some fish to offer to the kitty cat. So those go on the altar. You can see on my altar, here's the puppy dog with his little bones to kind of entice him to visit us. And then here's the little kitty cat back there with a little fish. Hopefully y'all can see. So those are some details for the altar. We have also, so speaking of the little fish on the plate, we have these little wooden buttons. And the trick to using these little wooden buttons is that if you're mindful of covering up the spot where the holes are in the button, so they are buttons, they do have the holes, but if you cover that hole, they look like beautiful embellished little wooden platters. So you can see here, I put a little bread on top of that one. I put some breads here, put avocados here. So I've covered the holes on there. I put a tamale there, I put a fish there. That makes it look like really beautiful decorative wooden platters on the table. You get a little miniature wooden bowl that is very cute, very cute. I put my little tamales in there, but you can arrange it any way that appeals to you. There are my little tamales. We've got some miniature candles. By miniature candles, I mean birthday candles, because birthday candles are the exact right size to fit in our mini glass votives. And so you get a 6-pack of these and a 6-pack of the little glass votives, and I'll show y'all how we make the prayer candles for this or for other crafts. And we sell the votives a la carte. So if you just want to make some mini prayer candles, you absolutely can. Just get some birthday candles. They're sized to fit standard birthday candles. We have a little 6-pack of some butterflies to represent the monarch butterflies that migrate that time of year and carry the spirits of our departed. And then we've got to make these speaking of the tamales in the bowl, the way we're going to make those tamales, I'll show y'all this, but this is the part of the kit that is for making mini tamales. We've got this paper ribbon, and when the time comes to make the tamales, we're going to unravel this. And this is going to represent corn husks on our mini tamales, but I will show y'all that. But basically, we're going to unwrap that paper. We've got a little butcher's twine that we're going to use to make the strings on the tamales. We're almost there. We've got, I mentioned the little cabochon. We've got some picture frames to put portraits of our loved ones. I have just put some black and white photos on there, but you can put portraits of your specific loved ones. That's a really great way to customize it and to make what's already a very special craft extra special. And then we've got some little bottles to put all over the altar. If you want to decoupage labels onto this because your loved ones had specific spirits or beverages that they enjoyed, you can do that. But we've got a nice little assortment of bottles, and it creates some really nice visual interest. And the last things are some pretty little Aurora Borealis skulls. Those just make a pretty little detail to sort of pop into little nooks and crannies to create some extra sparkle and just some great visual interest. And then because so many people, I think, associate Dia de los Muertos with the Disney film Coco, I've got a little guitar on there. So if you want to put a little guitar on your altar, you can have a little Coco theme and go. So that is the entire contents of the kits. And I am going to walk through bit by bit all the pieces of the kit and how you would put them together. Okie doke. So the first piece that I want to show y'all is how we make our little Calavera sugar skulls. So I would take the largest skull in the kit, as I mentioned. We've got the little bitties, we've got the mediums. I would just put these onto the altar like this without adding anything to them because they are so tiny. But if you feel like you really want that extra challenge, I salute you. So here are my beautiful little stone skulls in a bunch of pretty little colors. And I've got E6000, which because we're using glass stones and metal pieces and stone skulls, E6000 is great. If you're doing acrylic, you want to use a different glue, but we are doing E6000, so we're good with that. Let me get my toothpicks, and I'm going to use my toothpicks both to hold my skulls and to apply my embellishment. So I've got this cute little bag with all my little flowers in it. Move that. These are just decoration, it's all just decoration. These are decorative. I fill in the spaces on my altar. These are the little metal flowers that I would put on my sugar skulls, and then these are flowers that get filled in. So I'm gonna put those back here. All right, so now I've got my toothpicks, my E6000, my skulls, my stones, and then my metal flowers, and then my little rhinestones. So I am going to take a little skull, and I apologize, it's hard to see the miniatures, but the miniatures are so cute that we have to suffer for our art. All right, so I'm going to put this toothpick in. There we go, perfect. Not all the way through, but enough to hold it. So then I've got a nice little handle for my skull. And the little piece of foam, again, this is not in your kit, but this is basically trash. So just save a little bit of trash because that's just what you needed. Another excuse to hoard craft supplies. I'm here to help. All right, so I'm gonna shake my little guys out. And it's a beautiful, beautiful assortment. So again, we've done the work of finding a billion little tiny things, so your finished product will be extremely visually interesting just by unpacking one little set. Not one little set, one great big set, but if you're making a crowded composition, you need a lot of little details in there. All right, so I've got my skull on a toothpick. I've got my E6000 ready. Let me go ahead and put some other gals on skull. It's a little gruesome, little skulls on pikes, but it's the easiest way to work with them. If you're trying to pinch this tiny little thing, even if you have extremely delicate fingers, you're probably gonna go a little bit bananas. And I won't do them all at once because, you know, I'll probably want to break. And you don't have to do all of them. You don't have to do any of them at all, but this is, I think, a really pretty visual detail. So I'm gonna pop open my E6000, make myself a little puddle of that. E6000 is very stinky, so use it in a well-ventilated space. If you craft in a little broom closet or laundry room, E6000 is not necessarily gonna be your best friend. So use it in a well-ventilated space. So I've picked out, I'm gonna do my purple skull first. I've picked out some pretty blue eyes. And there is enough to put a little flower crown on everybody. I would go ahead, I would do 3 or 4. It's entirely up to you. So I take my toothpick and I use the E6000 to pick up the eye, and then I just roll that into place and kind of tuck that. And the more you do it, the more adept you'll get. But if you feel a little clumsy with it and you have a ton of glue there, that's okay. Handmade things are made with love and have little imperfections. Ooh, she's looking a little wonky. So I'm gonna slide her into place. And then my little girl has some pretty eyes on her. So then I'm gonna take, and you can put a lot of glue if you want. I mean, I guess it's not a lot of glue because it's a miniature, but feel free to put a nice little headband of glue on your little skull. And then I would just put those little roses. I'm gonna give her 3. Make her a pretty little crown of roses. And she's so beautiful. So I'm gonna sit her in the styrofoam and just let her dry. So let me show y'all that again real quick. Little puddle of glue. I'm gonna do the green one next. Oop, I broke my toothpick, but that's all right. There's plenty of toothpicks. I'm gonna pick out some red eyes. Oh, nope, those are different color eyes. I'm gonna pick out some red eyes, little tiny dot of glue, and put her little eye on. And if you're somebody who loves a wax dotting wand, go ahead and bust it out. I find I'm a little clumsy with the wax dotting wand, so sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Whatever makes it easier for you. And you can see she's got a lot of glue on her, but it's fine. She's so tiny. All right, she's got some little red eyes. And then I'm gonna take the rest of my glue puddle and make a nice headband. And then I'm gonna put, personally, I wouldn't put green on green just so it's a little more visually interesting, but there's really, whatever appeals to you is absolutely viable. So she's got her little crown. And so I would go ahead and do this with, I'm going to do it on all my little skulls, or maybe like half of my little skulls, and then they'll be ready to go onto my altar. So give them a chance to dry. E6000, you know, it'll be dry in like 15, 20 minutes, but I kind of let them sit overnight to get really strong. So the very last thing I want to mention about the sugar skulls before we move on to the next thing is when they are done and dry, you can just pop them off the toothpick like that. But if for some reason your toothpick got stuck in there, you can just cut that with scissors and just leave the edge of the toothpick inside the sugar skull. And then you'll be ready to go. So the next piece that I want to show y'all is how we do our little baked goods. So for the simplest little breads, I would recommend taking a little pinch of the gold clay, kind of rolling it, make a little circle, and that's a very cute little bread. And you can use one of your toothpicks to put a little crisscross in the top. I think that adds a little texture and it sort of invokes the little breads that have the bones crossed on top of them. I don't find I am able to mold that, but maybe you have a little bit more finesse in your molding than me. So I am gonna go ahead and make 3 little breads. And you might want to clean your space to avoid getting glitter in your clay, but it's also, to me, not a huge deal. So the great thing about oven baked clay is it does not lock in until you bake it. So if you don't love it, if you're like, oh, I wish that was a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. If I want a little smaller, I'm just gonna take a pinch off of there and try again. It will not dry out. So it feels kind of like playing with fancy Play-Doh, but it's not gonna dry out the way Play-Doh does. But I would press that flat and make myself a little cross. And you've got a ton of this, so you can make all sorts of things. You've got some extras to make king cakes or beignets or po' boy bread or whatever strikes your fancy. But you can make all sorts of cute little treats to put on your altar. I'm gonna make a bunch so that when I'm ready to put it together, I have options available. Some little ones I might pile up a little bit, and then some bigger ones that might just sit by themselves. So I'm making some little round ones and pressing a little X into the top, and I'm also making a little Play-Doh snake and twisting it together to make kind of a cute little rolled up pastry there. But anything you don't like, if it comes out and you aren't in love with it, you can just smush it together and put it back into your lump of clay and keep molding it until it's something you're happy with. You do not have to commit to it until you bake it. And if you're making a bunch of little clay stuff and you're ready to call it a night or call it a day, you can just leave it on the tray and bake it when you feel like it. Bake it when all your stuff is ready to go. It will stay soft until it is baked. So a word of caution with the oven baked clay is that you do not want to microwave it and you do not want to over bake it. So the instructions for baking the clay are 15 minutes per 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna bake these little cuties for about 15 minutes. And that will harden up your clay. So be careful, you do not wanna over bake. You do not wanna microwave. If you leave it in the oven too long or you put it in the microwave, you might have a fire on your hands and nobody's interested in that. So there are my little breads. I'll make maybe one more little guy. I made a couple little twists and a couple little round breads with a little cross hatch on top. Boop, boop. And I think those are very, very cute. So the other little treat that I'm gonna make to put on my altar, I'm gonna use the pink to make some conchas because I think the pink ones taste better. So sometimes your clay will be soft and easy to mold. Sometimes you'll have to do a little bit of what's called conditioning, where you kind of smush it a little in your hands. And you'll feel if it's soft and easy to work with, you can just start molding. If it's got a little bit of resistance, if it's a little too hard, go ahead and soften it up in your hands That's called conditioning, and that'll make your clay more cooperative. So just smush it into your hands until it feels soft. The older clay gets, the more it kind of dries out, or not dries out, the more it firms up, because it won't dry out, but it will with age kind of start to get a little harder because it's a polymer clay, so time will kind of cross-link it. So I would use your clay as fresh as possible. It's not a good thing to stockpile. Get it and make your stuff kind of soon after you buy it. All right, that's pretty good, but I want my lump a little bit bigger because I want to make 3 little conchas. So you can see this is more brittle and this is nice and soft because I've been working it with my hands. So just work a little bit with your hands, and a small lump is easier to work than a big lump. So I would work a little small lump and then add a little bit more to it and kind of little by little make myself a nice soft piece of polymer clay to work with. If it gets pretty old and it's really hard, you can try adding a little lotion to it. That'll kind of soften it up a little bit. But the best thing to do is work with clay pretty fresh and kind of make your stuff when you're ready. Alrighty, so I'm going to take a lump of clay about this big, and I'm going to divide it into 3 little lumps and make 3 little conchas. So to do that, I'm going to roll this ball in my hands, kind of press it flat. Again, I roll it into a little ball. It's just like playing with Play-Doh. This is like making Play-Doh spaghetti and Play-Doh meatballs. So you're just rolling some little balls. And it's okay if they're not all exactly the same size. That'll make them look realistic. So I'm rolling those little balls and pressing them a little bit. And so what I'm going to do to add the sugar texture to this, so I'm going to pop open my jar of little Pepto in my step. And I'm going to just roll them in there. And because the clay hasn't been baked yet, it's got a little bit of stickiness. And that makes them look super pretty and sugary and just really fun. And you could do that with some white glitter to make it look like white sugar. I'm gonna press that a little bit, just give it a slightly flatter shape. And then I'm going to take my toothpick and drag those little lines in there that give it that seashell texture. So just draw those little lines. Just little curves. You can carve those out as deep as you want, and that makes that kind of texture that a concha has, at least in miniature. And the toothpick kind of makes it, moves a little bit of the sugar out of the way. And by sugar, I of course mean glitter, so that you can kind of see those pink curves. All right, so they're pretty cute. And I'm not like, I think those curves, I was a little bit shaky-handed on that, so I'm just gonna try again. And I'll just put the slightly messier, that's a little better. I'll put the slightly messier side down. And the other thing is when you bake them, you know, you can put the prettiest ones on the top and the less pretty ones on the bottom. There we go, beautiful. So I've got my little breads, my little conchas. Before I put all this in the oven, I want to make the filling for my tamales. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and roll myself a little Play-Doh snake. By Play-Doh, of course, I mean polymer clay, but I mean it's the same process. You pinch a piece off, you roll it, and then you roll your hands back and forth to make it a tube, a nice long tube. So that looks like a Play-Doh snake. I think I want a little fatter than that. And it's very forgiving. If you roll it out and you aren't in love, just smush it back together and start over. All right, so that's a pretty good thickness. I'm happy with that thickness. And then this, I'm gonna just kind of pinch it on the ends. And that one, I want this a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna take a slightly bigger pinch. It's pretty forgiving, but you do want a little something in the tamales so they look full. I'm actually gonna make 2 more, so I'm gonna take an even bigger pinch. All right. Nice little Play-Doh snake there. And I'm gonna pinch the ends with my toothpick. And if the ends aren't clean, it doesn't matter too much, because you're gonna be, these are just the filling. You're gonna be wrapping them in that fake corn husk. All right. So very last thing, I'm gonna make the molcajete, which is the little mortar and pestle. So I'm gonna set these aside. So I'm gonna take a lump of this. And this is pretty firm, so it's gonna need some conditioning. Just smushing it to make it a little more cooperative with me. And the more you smush it in your hands and condition it, the softer it'll get and the easier it'll be to work with. But this clay is really cool because it has the little flecks in it, so it already looks like it's granite. So you don't have to do anything to it except mold it and bake it, and it'll have that really cool effect. All right, so I'm gonna roll myself a little ball, and then I'm gonna press the ball flat. It's gonna be about the size of, like, you know, maybe a little bigger than a quarter, maybe like a silver dollar. And then I'm just gonna round that, kind of smush it into like a pinch pot, like we all made in school. Kind of give it a bowl shape. I'm gonna kind of pinch it into that bowl shape. And it's clay, so if you pinch your bowl into a little pinch pot and you aren't happy with it, just smush it and try again. Try again as many times as you like until it looks the way you want it to look, or you're done. All right. Then I like to take a little bit more clay, and you're gonna have a lot left over, a lot of leftover clay to play with, so you can make fun stuff with the granite and with the gold and with the pink. I'm gonna condition this. In this batch, the gold was really soft and didn't need any conditioning. The blush needed a little conditioning, and the granite is a little tougher. Every batch will kind of vary. It's not like one color is consistently soft and one color is consistently difficult. All right, but that's nice. So I'm gonna divide this into 4 equal pieces, just 4 little lumps, and then roll some little feet. And I think it's cute if it's rustic. So I wouldn't try to make it too geometrically perfect. I think I would let it be a little bit imperfect so that it looks real. All right, now I'm just gonna smoosh those on there so that it has some little feet to stabilize it, so it looks like a cute little bowl. And the very last thing I'm gonna do is condition a little piece, maybe a little bigger than that. It can be hard to eyeball it, but if you make it and it's way too big, just pinch a little off and start over. If you make it and it's way too small, add a little bit to your lump and start over. Polymer clay is very forgiving. I'm gonna move this because I don't want to accidentally bake my whole lump of clay. All right, so I've got another little piece of my granite. I'm gonna kind of roll it into a ball. I'm gonna kind of roll it into a tube. And then I'm gonna roll more on one end to make it kind of that club shape of the pestle that's gonna sit in there with some fake guacamole, and that's gonna look like look like I was grinding a little bowl of guacamole. So these are all my bits. I am going to bake these at 275 degrees Fahrenheit. Let me check that before I commit to that. Yes, 265 degrees Fahrenheit. My mistake. 265 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to bake these for 15 minutes because they're little. You don't want to over bake. And if you're making something really big out of polymer clay, I would take like a lump of foil and kind of give it some foil guts so that it isn't thick clay all the way through. That would be my advice. So these I'm going to bake for 15 minutes at 265, and then I'll bring y'all back. So I went and got my polymer clay stuff out of the oven. Do not touch it yet, because not only is it hot, it's a little sticky, and you don't want to smudge it or get fingerprints in it. So this is out of the oven. This got 15 minutes at 265 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to let these cool down, and once they're cooled down, then they're ready for me to mess with them some more. And you can see I went ahead, and while I was doing it, I made a whole second set of everything. I made another molcajete, I made another set of tamale filling, and I made some more bread and some more conchas, because I figured while I was doing it, I might as well. I have enough to make tons, so that's what I went ahead and did. Alrighty, so the next piece that we're going to work on would be making our little prayer candles. So we've got these little votives, and a word of caution. If this is going to be a throw that is coming off of a float, do not use the glass. You do not want to put breakable glass on your throws, and these are glass. The same is true for the ceramic fish. Don't put the ceramic and don't put the glass. Those are breakable. If this is a display piece that you are going to put in your home, or you're going to give to a friend in person, and it's not coming off the float, that's a different story. But if it's coming off the float, just leave the glass off. I would just put the candles by themselves without the votives. If you are doing the votives, this is what I would do. You're going to want to cut your birthday candles, and we put some lovely bright glitter candles into the kit already. But you're going to want to cut them to the right height. It's about half the size of the candle, I would say. I like to use a razor, but you can use whatever. And then this is actually, if you're careful, you can get 2 candles out of this. Just warm that a little and the wick will come back out. But anyway, that's going to fit right in there. Exact right size for that. You can put your candles just like that onto your altar, but it's extra fun to decoupage a tiny little label onto there. So let me do a few more. That's a good height for my candle. And they can be different heights because they're all different, but let me go ahead and cut those. All right. So later I'm going to melt those and get the wick back out so that I can use those too. All right, I've got some little candles and I've got some little holders. So I've got 6 candles and 6 little votives. One rolled away. So I'm going to put those in. So what I'm going to do to decoupage my little labels on there is the same thing I do. I made a video of this for the St. Joseph's altar. I just printed some little prayer candle labels off of Google. And we don't include the labels in the kit because everybody does things a little differently, and this is a great way to customize. So, and they make some really funny prayer candles for, like, Dolly Parton and like your favorite musician and stuff. So feel free to use the prayer candle that you think is appropriate for your composition. I got some kind of traditional ones. I just Googled prayer candles and printed them. All right. So I've got a couple little labels there. Let me go ahead and cut them all out while I'm cutting. So I just cut my tiny little labels. This is a good size for the candles that I'm doing for this, but you can always resize. Alrighty, move all my stuff out of the way. So I've got these little extra candles, which I am gonna save, because if I just melt them with a little flame, I can get some more candles out of this, because there really is enough to do multiple throws. All right, so I've got my little votives and I've got my little candles. I've got some decoupage glue and I've got a little brush. This is a smaller brush than I would use for glittering a shoe, but it's better for decoupage. So pay attention to which end is up. I sometimes get that wrong and then I'm frustrated with myself. Let's start there. So to do decoupage, you're going to put a little bit of glue on your base, and you want it to be really thin. You don't want it to be like sloshing around. The glue does dry clear, so you don't have to worry about it being exactly the shape of the label. And so once I've got a little bit of glue on there, I'm going to wrap my label gently, kind of press it into the glue. And then, and this is the sort of magic of decoupage, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on top. And what happens is the glue underneath and the glue above sort of make a little seal and make the candle look like it's got a traditional label on there. And keep it really thin. Don't put a ton of glue because you don't want, the Mod Podge is water-based, so you don't want to like dissolve your paper. You don't want to put so much glue that the paper is getting like disintegrated. So I'm going to let that dry, and I can always add more glaze if I want it, if I want a little more glaze on top, but I'm going to let that dry. I don't want to put so much glaze that it starts to disintegrate the paper. But when it's dry, I'll put a little candle in there, and I'll have a tiny little miniature prayer candle. Very tiny. So I'm going to do that to all my labels and then let them dry, and maybe a little extra glaze, maybe. And that's my prayer candle. So same thing, I pay attention to where the top is. Don't put the label on upside down. I've definitely done that. A little thin layer of glue. And then I'll wrap one of my labels. And I like my labels to mostly cover the glass, except there be a little bit of a space in the back. That's, I think, what the real ones look like. So that to me is the most realistic. And then a little bit of glaze on top, just a little bit of glaze. If you want it super glossy, let it dry and then put another glaze. Don't put too much glaze at once. That's where you run into trouble. Secret to decoupage is, in my opinion, many thin layers rather than going too much too fast. They're tough to handle because they're so little, but the miniature is what makes it cute. So again, tiny little fiddly things, but the small things are so, so cute. Thin layer of glue. Tiny little label. Press it pretty flat. And you can decoupage onto like any surface that's flat, as long as it's not porous. So you can't really decoupage onto something that's kind of spongy. So if you have like a suede shoe or a fabric shoe, you can't decoupage onto that. But if you have like a patent leather shoe or like a wood wedge or a wood heel, that's great for decoupage. And I love to decoupage onto my shoes when the design calls for it. So this one is already, falling out of my hands. This one is already dry. So I'm going to add a little bit of glaze on top of that so it looks like that nice glossy sticker. Those are my prayer candles, my tiny, tiny little prayer candles. Okay, so while we're kind of in paper craft mode, while our decoupaged prayer candles are drying, oh, and I do want to mention, you can use that same decoupage technique if you want to put a label on your bottles. I'm going to leave my bottles plain, but for altar purposes, you may feel like you want there to be a specific offering, like, you know, if your departed loved one really loved a particular type of liquor or a particular drink or like a brand of beer, it would be super cute to do that. My favorite part of making these miniatures is making them personalized. People come up with all sorts of really cute details to honor their specific recipient, and I think that's super cool. I've made sort of traditional offerings for the altar, but you know, you can put any type of food on there in miniature that you like. If they were really into pizza, make them a little clay pizza. You know, if they were really into a particular type of cookie or a particular type of drink, I think it's really cute to do that. So while we're in paper mode, I'm cutting these out. These are just, I Googled black and white portraits, or you know, black and white vintage portraits, and found some kind of old portraits for putting in my picture frames. I think it's really cute to put your specific recipients in there. You know, if you have a particular pet you'd like to put in there, but I just used some sort of old-fashioned daguerreotypes. So I would print them to the right size, and the kit instructions include size. It's like about 1 inch tall by about 5/8 of an inch wide is the opening. But you know, just check that you're happy with it before you glue it in. And then when you are ready to put your portraits in, I would put just a little whisper of hot glue, just enough. Oop. And that's how I would do the frames. It's all right if it looks a little wonky, that's on the back. So just a really thin thread of hot glue. Oop. And if the glue shows a little bit, that's just how it goes. That's what part of why you want to keep the hot glue light. It doesn't take much to hold paper, but you don't want it to come oozing out. All right. And so those are going to be the portraits that I put on the altar. I glued them to my paper a little bit, no biggie. All right, so those are ready to go. You could, if you wanted to, you could glaze those with Mod Podge so they look more like photographs. Depends on how you are feeling about it. Okie doke, so let's get our ducks in a row here. We're done with our decoupage. Those are over there. The candles are gonna go in there. My sugar skulls are drying. My portraits are ready. My candles are drying. Oop, I do not need this anymore. These have cooled off, so they are ready to assemble. Super cute. Love these. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put together my tamales. So let me take my little tubes and show y'all how we do tamales. So I'm gonna set these aside for now and we'll come back to them when we assemble. All right, so in your kit, you've got this, you've got a really long piece of this because it's delicate, and if you tear it, we don't want you to be out of luck. But you've got this long piece of this paper ribbon, and it's this raffia ribbon that's like crushed together. So you do have to unravel it, and getting it started is the hardest part. But I kind of crush it a little bit to see if I can find the edge. It's like finding the edge on a roll of tape. So I get it started. Unravel your paper. It does not need to be unraveled all the way to the edges, but this is going to make our little corn husk for our little tamale. So I would cut a piece that is about, you know, twice as long as my tamale is, a little longer. You can always trim it down, but you can't trim it longer, so err on the side of a little long. Let me go ahead and cut 2 of those while I'm cutting. But I look like I made about 4 tamales on this one, but you can make, you know, as many as you want. It takes a very, very small amount of clay, and you've got tons of paper. All right, so I've got my nice rectangle of paper cut there. That's, you know, 2 or 3 inches of paper. What I'm gonna do is fold it in half. My little tamale filling goes in there. If you want to, you can put a tiny little bit of hot glue so it doesn't scooch around. Just a tiny bit. Put that in there. All right, so my tamale is folded in there. You have a piece of butcher's twine. The twine is actually made of several, if you unravel it, it's made of several smaller threads. And you could use this, but the scale is so big, it's gonna look like a big old rope on your tamale. You want it to look like a little piece of twine. So I would unravel my butcher's twine. Take a little piece off of that. It's gonna twist up on itself as you unravel it. All right, there we go. So I've got some thin pieces I pulled a few thin strands off of my butcher's twine. Might go even thinner than that. Yeah, I'm just gonna do 2. All right, so I pulled a couple of threads off of my piece of butcher's twine. All right, so my tamale is folded in half. You're gonna do like this. You're gonna fold to the back, and then wrap the twine around the top. And do a lot of wraps to really make that bit at the top. There we go. And then once it's good, you're gonna put a knot in it. And then cut your twine short. And at this point, I'm probably gonna cut this a little shorter. And that's your precious little tamale. So let me show you all that again, just one more time. Throw my extra little bits of twine. So I've got a couple thin pieces of my twine. You could go with the full, you don't really have enough. I don't know, you might, I don't know. I wouldn't use the full piece. I would use a few threads of it. All right, so I've got some tamale thread. All right, so I've got my rectangle here. I've got my little baked tube that makes the filling there. I'm gonna put a tiny amount of hot glue here just to hold it in place. All right, fold your tamale in half. So that's just folded down the middle. And then to create the shape, you're gonna wrap the 2 loose sides around the back and then pinch it at the neck there. So let me show you all that. That's the trickiest part. Tamale goes into the paper, fold it in half, and then wrap it around the back. So in half and then back, both sides around, and then a little bit of twine. Isn't that just the cutest thing ever? And like I said, I would keep your paper a little on the long side so that you can trim it down. Boop. Boop. Trim the twine short. Trim the twine short, and then maybe take that down a little bit. So there's our tamales. And these are gonna go in I have this cute little bowl. So I'm gonna put them in the little bowl. I'm gonna go ahead and make some more so that my bowl is nice and full. But those are super cute and super ready to go. So the very last piece that we wanna make before we start assembly, and this is honestly kind of part of our assembly, you've got this green cord and these little cotton wires. This is just wrapped up so it doesn't go every which way. So I'm just taking the twisty tie off of this. Alrighty. So you want to cut your wire to approximate, you've got 2 pieces of wire. And you could, if you wanted an arch that big, you could do an arch that big. I personally think that's a little bit big, but I don't know what your project is. If you're doing an Orpheus tambourine or a Themis umbrella, that might be a good size arch. For me, I would like my arch to be about the size that I did here. So, you know, about there. I want my arch to be about that size, kind of a nice little horseshoe. So I'm going to trim this wire down a little bit. So I took a few inches off my wire, and I can save that for something else. Ooh, you go here. I want both. I need 2 wires that are the same length, and the length should be about the size that I want my arch. And, you know, measure once, measure twice, cut once, as they say. So make sure it's the size you want because it's hard to put it back together. But that, I think, is a good size. I like the size I did on this one, so that one's pretty close. So I've got my 2 wires cut to the size I want them. These little leftover bits I'll save for something else. Who knows? All right. And then I've got my mesh tubing. So I'm going to cut my mesh tubing to a little bit longer than that. All right, and let me just cut everything at once. So a little bit of leftover mesh tubing, but better to have a little too much than a little too little. As we said, this is enough that if you want to make a really big arch because you're doing a bigger project, you certainly can. So what we need to do, the mesh tubing is going to make our arch, but the mesh tubing is very soft. So we need to line our mesh tubing with the wire to make our arch. So the way we do that is we thread it. The mesh tubing is hollow in the middle. You can maybe see it's a tube, so you can go right down the middle. So feed your wire down the mesh tubing. Be careful not to poke it out the side. You don't want to do that. You want to go right down the middle. Thread it in there. All right. So now I've got mesh tubing that has a wire floating in it. So what I'm going to do to anchor the ends, I'm going to put a dot of hot glue right there near the end. And then be careful, hot glue is hot, but if you pinch on either side, I can probably show that a little better. If you pinch on either side, it will hold the mesh tubing against the glue while it cools off. So I'll do that again. Let's see if I can show that really clearly. Thread your wire through the tube, and the tube is like it accordions, so you can kind of do that to get it all the way through there. You can kind of caterpillar it through, but however you do it, get the mesh tubing fed all the way through. All right, so I've got my mesh tubing lined with wire, so not at the very end because I need to leave a spot to put my finger. So like about a ½ an inch away from the end, I put a very small dot of hot glue, and then I'm going to pinch. I'm going to pull it, and that makes it flat against the wire. So y'all see that anchors it really nicely. And I do this all the time. I do a lot of wire lined mesh tubing. I think it makes a really pretty embellishment, so I just love to do that. All right, let's do the same thing on the other end. About a ½ inch away from the end, I'm gonna do one tiny little dot. Ooh, that's kind of a big dot. Tiny little dot. And then pull on either side. And if you're nervous about this, you can cut a really long piece of wire and put it like an inch away from the end so your fingers aren't even close to it. But I expect y'all are all pretty handy with a hot glue gun. So y'all can see the wire is loose inside the mesh up here, but it's firmly anchored there. So I'm going to trim the little end off there. So that's why I aired a little on the side of a little bit above. All right, so now I've got this great wire lined mesh tubing. So I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Find the end of my wire. Where are you? Find the end of my wire. About a ½ inch away, just a little bit of hot glue, nothing insane, and then pinch, pull either end to like force the mesh to touch the hot glue so it grabs it real good. All right, perfect, perfect. All righty. It's a little loose, so I might add a smidge more glue. But be really careful. I don't want y'all burning your fingertips. Okay. All right, so now I've got 2 arches. Perfect. All right, so I went and got myself some trim. We sell this really pretty GIMP in many, many colors, and I love it because it really hugs the curves, and I just think that's terrific. Okay. So now we are ready to go. Let me tidy up my space a little bit so that I'm ready. I've got my flowers. All right, I've got bottles, flowers. I'll put the extra candles over here. I'll put these back here. And then I'll just scooch everything back so that I have room to work. So I want y'all to see what I'm doing. All right, room to work. Okie doke. So the first thing I'm gonna do personally is put my tablecloth in place. So I kind of roll the end a little bit. I think I'm actually gonna trim first. I'm a liar. All right, I'm gonna trim first. Ready to start a new glue stick, so I put a dot on the end. Start the next one. Starting a new piece of trim, so I do a little dot of hot glue. Let that cool off. Whee! All right, flowers, frames, a couple of plain. All right, everything that I'm not using is out of the way. I'll leave those in a moment. Okay. When your hot glue dries, you can cut a nice clean edge that won't unravel. I am gonna grab my edge there. Looks good. And you may notice as I'm handling this shoe that the top is extremely sparsely glittered. I've got bald spots. I'm not worried because I'm going to cover all that up. The nice thing about a table is when I put a tablecloth on there, that evens a lot of those issues out. All right. And you can see where I pulled the straps out of this one. It's kind of got a gap, but that's fine. I'm gonna just fill it in and cover it up with my trim. Beautiful. Purple and the red is super pretty together. I love that. Okay. All the way around the shoe. I will not be offended if you skip this part because you've seen me trim a million shoes. Good to have a clean workspace because then stuff doesn't get snagged in your glue. That's do as I say, not as I do. Okay. Beautiful. And then I'm not going to worry about the end being clean because I'm just going to put a flower right on top of that. I can cover up my sort of ugly end there with a flower. Cuteness. All right, so I'm ready to do my tablecloth now. I like to kind of fold it over a little bit so that the edge is clean. So I do that and then come around. But I've definitely seen people who cut the piece of ribbon to fit the shoe exactly. That is also totally viable. And then I'm going to curve it a little so it follows the shape of the shoe and then do the same thing on the end that I did at the beginning. I kind of curve it and anchor it a little bit. And the tablecloth will mostly be covered because it's a very overwhelming in a nice way kind of composition. And I'm probably gonna fold those edges down just a little bit. So it don't look like much yet, but we ain't done. You want to make sure it's on there pretty good because everything that's going on this shoe is going onto the tablecloth. So it is not a time to skimp on hot glue. Make sure everything is nice and anchored before you proceed. All right. So I got my tablecloth on my table. Next thing, I've got my little arch. So I'm going to make the arch by twisting these together, kind of wrapping one around the other. And this gets pretty covered up, so I would not be too stressed out about it being perfectly even. You want them kind of twisted together to sort of make the garland, but you're going to put a ton of flowers over it, so you're honestly going to see hardly any. Though if you're doing one where you want to see a lot of the green, then you can kind of do it carefully. All right, so those are my two little mesh wire horseshoes twisted together to make the arch. So the arch is going to go up there. And I'm going to do one end first and let it settle down. And this I'm going to cover with flowers, so I'm not worried about it being pretty. So feel free to be especially generous with your hot glue because you're going to cover all this up. You can see it all got covered up. The boring part where we wait for the hot glue. So I'm giving that hot glue a chance to get nice and strong. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and cut the wires off of these flowers. And it uses up a ton of flowers, so. And you want to mix the colors. These are mostly orange because marigolds are so famous on altars. And so bright and cheerful, but it's a mix of colors to make it very visually interesting. All right, so I've given it some time. The hot glue is strong. I've trimmed a whole bunch of flowers. So that's nice and strong there. Good. And so then we can do the other side, same as we did the first side. Get that in there. Make the shape of the arch. Even, nice curved arch. And you know, you add a little bit of hot glue and you let it get firm. You add a little bit of hot glue and let it get firm. And then eventually you have the shape of your arch. So what we're going to do is completely cover this arch, or at least I like to completely cover it with flowers. But everybody has different aesthetics. So you may prefer to have some green showing. I like the arch to be completely filled in with flowers. It takes time, but that's what makes it pretty. And so I'm mostly doing orange flowers, but with a mix of some of the others in between. So to attach the flowers to the arch, the flowers are super light, so it just takes a little bit of hot glue. You can just touch them to the altar, to the arch. And this is how I would make any kind of floral arch on a throw or on any other project. I would use the wire in the mesh tubing, and then I would cover it with tiny little fake flowers. And you want to make sure you go all the way around, get both sides of it, And I'm seeing that where I've laid that kind of is a little awkward. So I'm gonna remove it. There we go. I'm gonna lean the tablecloth down. Sometimes we adjust as we go. And by sometimes, I mean all the time. So it takes a while to fill in the arch entirely. So I'm gonna fill that in and come back and show y'all when it's done. But basically I'm just continuing to go all the way around both sides, fill it in completely. And don't forget that you have some of these little flowers too to kind of make it a little more visually interesting so that it looks like a bunch of different types of flowers on the arch. So like, there we go. And like if I put different flowers, and it's very fancy. So it looks good on both sides. I'm going to cover the arch with flowers all the way to the bottom of the wires so that you don't see the wires. It just looks like flowery beautifulness. See that? And so that way you can go as far as you need to on the hot glue. You can make the hot glue really nice and strong so that your composition is sturdy. Because this one, because it's time intensive, this one might or might not be coming off the float, but if it's coming off the float, you want it to be strong. All right. All right, so the arch is basically completed. There are some spots that I'm gonna put some smaller flowers in. But moving on to the rest of the assembly, I'm gonna kind of follow what I did here because I like what I did here. So we've got our little mortar and pestle. Kind of put that there. Get that situated. And I've got my little basket of tamales there. And as you start to put this together, you'll kind of feel if you need to get some more glue underneath your tablecloth, you'll kind of feel that. So let's get all our pieces. We've got our picture frames, and you can see I've kind of propped those up by putting a little bit of glue on the bottom there. And as I mentioned earlier, oh, come here, everybody. Everybody come here. As I mentioned earlier, when you put your wooden plates, your buttons, you just want to be mindful of covering up the holes so they look more like mini platters. So I'm going to put a little fish on this plate. And I'm going to put that there. And then I'm going to take my little Kit Kat and put a little bit of hot glue right down there. So she can kind of sit there with her plate and admire the fish we have put there as an offering. The shape of the shoe it's flat surfaced, but it is curved. So just kind of be aware to follow the shape as you go. That's part of how you can see these picture frames kind of look like they're sitting upright because they're in that part. Let's see what else we have. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm just going to continue to fill stuff in. Put a little plate there. Put a little treat on the plate. Let me put a big one since that plate's pretty big. Covering up the holes so it just looks like a wooden plate. So I'm going to continue to fill everything in. Continue to add embellishments. I like to put some of my avocados near my mortar and pestle to kind of make it clear that guacamole is happening there. So I'm going to put 3 of these over here. And then I'll put 3 of them on a little plate like I've done here to put in a different part. Actually, let me see. Yeah, that's pretty cute. And I'll probably put some flowers around the edge. And then the other piece of the assembly that I do want to mention is that you have a little squeezy bottle that is sealed up. So I'm going to cut open this bag with the squeezy bottle in it. And I would do this last so that you're not tipping everything every which way. But for the purposes of demonstration, I want y'all to see. You can squeeze a little guacamole in there. See that just fine. And then you can set your little grinder in there. So it looks like it's in the process. And so just continue to add all your stuff. I'm gonna put one of my little prayer candles. And I will mention, I mostly use hot glue for assembly, but if you find anything is popping off, you can use a little bit of E6000 to kind of help make it stronger. I'm gonna put a little bit of glue there and kind of angle her up a little bit. And just continue to fill in. So I've got all these cute little bottles, these cute little candles, tons of beautiful little skulls, beautiful flowers. In this case, I'm going to use this to kind of prop that photo up a little bit. So just continue to fill in until it's completely full, or as full as you like it. I shouldn't tell you how to assemble your piece of art, but that is how I put it all together. I'm going to take my 3 little conchas, make a little pile. So cute. And I'll put those on there, wherever I decide I want those. And I'll just continue to fill in until it's completely lush and beautiful. But that is the kit in a nutshell. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us for anything you need to ask us questions about on this kit or any other glitter technique, and we are here to help. Happy glittering.